The music at the rooftop party was soft enough to allow conversation but loud enough to hide secrets, which was exactly why events like this were so popular among the city's most influential circles. Crystal lights reflected against the glass walls of the penthouse venue, and guests moved comfortably between small conversations about investments, travel, and appearances that mattered more than honesty. Emily Carter had attended dozens of events like this beside her husband, Ryan, and she had learned long ago how to smile at the right moments, respond politely to the right people, and ignore the quiet exhaustion that sometimes followed evenings built entirely around appearances. That night, however, something already felt different before anything actually happened. Ryan had disappeared almost 20 minutes earlier after telling her he needed to speak briefly with someone upstairs. It wasn't unusual for him to move around during events like this. He was social, confident, and always surrounded by business contacts. Normally, Emily wouldn't have thought twice about it. But something about the way he avoided eye contact before leaving had stayed with her longer than she expected. She was standing near the edge of the balcony when a calm voice spoke beside her. "Your husband is upstairs with my wife." For a second, Emily didn't react at all. The sentence sounded too strange, too direct, too impossible to belong inside a polite conversation. She turned slowly toward the man who had spoken, expecting to see someone joking or misunderstanding something. Instead, she saw Adrian Hale. Everyone in the city knew his name. He wasn't just wealthy, he was precise, controlled, and known for rarely speaking unless he had already confirmed what he was saying. His expression wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was steady in a way that made the sentence he had just spoken feel even heavier. Emily stared at him, unsure whether she had heard correctly. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "What did you just say?" Adrian didn't look surprised by her reaction. If anything, he looked like someone who had expected it. "I said," he repeated calmly, "your husband is upstairs with my wife." The music continued playing behind them. Guests continued laughing. Glasses continued clinking in celebration. But for Emily, the entire evening had just changed direction in a single sentence she could not ignore anymore. For a few seconds after Adrian Hale spoke, Emily Carter remained completely still, not because she believed him immediately, but because the certainty in his voice left no space for misunderstanding. He hadn't sounded angry. He hadn't sounded jealous. He had sounded informed, and that difference made the sentence far more difficult to dismiss as a mistake. "I think there's been some confusion," Emily said carefully, forcing calm into her voice even though her chest felt suddenly tight. "Ryan went upstairs to take a call. That's what he told me." Adrian studied her expression for a moment before responding. There was no hesitation in his tone when he spoke again. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's what my wife told me too." The way he said it made Emily's stomach drop. He wasn't accusing her husband. He wasn't asking a question. He was confirming a pattern. Emily glanced toward the staircase leading to the upper level of the penthouse. It was partially hidden behind a decorative glass divider designed to separate the private lounge area from the main party space. Guests rarely used that section unless they were attending smaller meetings or stepping away for quiet conversations. Ryan had never mentioned needing privacy during events like this before. "Why would you tell me this?" Emily asked finally, lowering her voice so no one nearby could hear. Adrian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and checked his phone briefly, as if confirming something one last time before speaking again. "Because I went upstairs first," he said. Emily blinked. "And?" she asked, her voice barely steady now. "And the door was locked," Adrian replied calmly. "Not completely. Just enough to make it clear they didn't want anyone walking in without warning." Emily felt something inside her shift. Not collapse, not panic, but recognition. The kind that arrives when suspicion quietly turns into possibility. "I knocked," Adrian continued. No one answered, but I heard voices. Emily's fingers tightened slightly around the glass she was holding. She hadn't realized she was still gripping it until that moment. "What kind of voices?" she asked. Adrian looked directly at her then, not unkindly but honestly. The kind people don't use during business conversations. For the first time that evening, Emily stopped trying to explain Ryan's absence to herself. Instead, she looked again toward the staircase, this time not as a direction he had casually walked, but as a place he had deliberately chosen. Adrian followed her gaze. "I thought," he said quietly, "you deserve to decide what you want to do next before they come back downstairs pretending nothing happened." And suddenly, the party no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a waiting room before the truth arrived. Emily did not move toward the staircase immediately. That surprised Adrian more than he expected. Most people, when confronted with something like this, reacted quickly, either with anger, disbelief, or urgency strong enough to override caution. But Emily remained standing exactly where she was, her eyes still fixed on the upper floor, her breathing steady in a way that suggested she was thinking instead of reacting. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. It wasn't denial. It was confirmation. Adrian understood the difference. "Yes," he replied simply. Emily nodded once, slowly. Then she placed her untouched glass on the table beside her as though she had just finished something important instead of setting something down she no longer had the strength to hold. Around them, the party continued exactly as before. Someone nearby laughed loudly at a joke. A waiter passed carrying fresh drinks. Music drifted across the rooftop like nothing unusual had happened at all. That contrast made everything feel sharper. "How long?" Emily asked. Adrian didn't pretend to misunderstand. "I noticed changes 3 months ago," he answered. "Late messages. Private meetings that didn't make sense. Schedule overlaps that shouldn't have existed." Emily swallowed slowly. "Ryan started working later around that time too," she admitted before she could stop herself. There was something strangely grounding about saying it aloud, like placing a missing piece into a puzzle she had been pretending wasn't incomplete. "I followed her tonight," Adrian continued calmly. "Not in a dramatic way. I just paid attention. When your husband left the main floor, she followed him 2 minutes later." Emily closed her eyes briefly, not because she was overwhelmed, but because the timeline suddenly became clear inside her mind. 2 minutes. Ryan had said he needed to take a call. 2 minutes later, Adrian's wife had disappeared too. When Emily opened her eyes again, her expression had changed. The uncertainty she carried earlier was gone. In its place was something quieter and stronger. "What's her name?" she asked. "Vanessa," Adrian said. Emily nodded again, almost thoughtfully this time, as if she were memorizing something she would need later. "And how long have you been married?" she asked him next. 8 years, Adrian replied. Emily looked back toward the staircase once more. 6 for me, she said softly. There was no anger in her voice when she said it, only clarity. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian said something neither of them had expected when the conversation first began. "I didn't come downstairs to make a scene," he told her. "I came downstairs to make sure you weren't the only one being lied to tonight." Emily looked at him differently after that, not as the man who had delivered terrible news, but as the only person in the room who was standing in the same truth she was now beginning to see clearly. And for the first time since the evening started, she realized she wasn't alone in what was happening upstairs. Emily expected anger to arrive first. She expected her hands to shake, her voice to rise, or, at the very least, some urgent impulse to walk upstairs and demand answers immediately. But none of that happened. Instead, what she felt was something far quieter and far more unsettling. It was clarity. For years, she had trusted Ryan without hesitation. Their marriage had not been perfect, but it had been stable, predictable, safe in the way long partnerships usually became after enough shared routines and promises. And now, standing beside a man she had barely spoken to before tonight, she realized that stability had not disappeared suddenly. It had been slowly replaced without her noticing. "What are you going to do?" Adrian asked carefully. Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked around the party again, not as a guest this time, but as someone seeing the environment differently. Conversations sounded distant now. Laughter felt staged. Even the decorations suddenly looked less impressive than they had when she first arrived. It was strange how quickly appearances lost meaning once the truth behind them changed. "If I go upstairs now," she said finally, "I'll only give them the reaction they expect." Adrian studied her expression, surprised again by how calm she sounded. "And what reaction is that?" he asked. A scene, Emily replied simply. Shock. Anger. Something emotional enough to make this look like a misunderstanding instead of a decision they both made. Adrian didn't respond immediately. It wasn't the answer he had expected from her, but it made sense. Emily crossed her arms lightly, not defensively, but thoughtfully. How long have you known for sure? She asked him. Tonight confirmed it, Adrian said. Before that, I only had suspicion. Emily nodded slowly. That means they think they're being careful, she said. Yes, Adrian agreed. That also means they think we don't know. Adrian looked at her then, with something close to respect. Yes, he said again. Emily glanced once more toward the staircase, but this time her expression had changed completely. She wasn't looking up there like someone about to confront betrayal anymore. She was looking up there like someone already thinking ahead of it. Then maybe, she said quietly, we shouldn't interrupt them. Adrian raised an eyebrow slightly. Emily turned back toward the party floor, her voice calm but steady. Maybe we should let them come downstairs, she continued, believing everything is still under their control. Adrian watched her carefully now, beginning to understand something important. Emily Carter wasn't trying to avoid the truth. She was deciding how she wanted to respond to it. And for the first time that evening, he realized this situation might not end the way either Ryan or Vanessa expected. Emily and Adrian did not move toward the staircase. Instead, they moved deeper into the party. To anyone watching from a distance, it looked completely ordinary. Two guests stepping away from the balcony to join the main crowd again. But inside that simple movement was a quiet agreement neither of them needed to say aloud. Whatever was happening upstairs would not be confronted emotionally. Not tonight. Not like this. They stopped near one of the tall glass windows overlooking the city skyline. From there, they could see both the staircase and the elevator exit that led back down from the private level. It was the kind of position people chose when they wanted privacy, without leaving the room entirely. They'll come down together, Adrian said quietly. No, Emily replied calmly. They won't. Adrian looked at her, slightly surprised. They'll come down separately, she continued. Far enough apart to make it look natural. Adrian considered that for a second, then nodded slowly. You're right. Emily wasn't guessing. She was recognizing behavior she had already started noticing months earlier, small delays, unexplained timing differences, carefully structured excuses. The pattern made sense now. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke again. They simply watched the staircase without making it obvious. Then Vanessa appeared first. She walked down alone, her expression composed and relaxed, exactly the way someone looked after stepping away briefly for a phone call or private conversation. She adjusted her bracelet as she reached the last step and immediately joined a nearby group of guests, as if she had never left the party at all. Emily observed everything quietly. 2 minutes later, Ryan came down. He checked his phone while walking, paused briefly near the bar, and then greeted someone from across the room with the same easy confidence he always carried. To anyone watching casually, nothing about his behavior suggested he had been anywhere unusual. But Emily noticed something else. He didn't look toward her. Not once. It was a small detail, but it confirmed everything. Adrian followed her gaze. They think they handled it well, he said quietly. Yes, Emily replied. She watched Ryan laugh at something someone said, completely unaware that she had already seen through the careful timing of his return. For a moment, the silence between her and Adrian returned again. Then Emily spoke, more thoughtfully this time. How long has your wife been involved in your company events? She asked. About 6 months, Adrian answered. Emily nodded slowly. Ryan started insisting we attend more of them around then, she said. The pattern was becoming clearer with every piece they shared. Adrian studied her expression carefully. What are you thinking? He asked. Emily didn't look away from the crowd when she answered. I'm thinking, she said quietly, this didn't start tonight. Adrian already knew that, but the way she said it made something else clear. Emily Carter wasn't trying to confirm betrayal anymore. She was beginning to understand its structure. And once someone understands structure, they stop reacting to situations. They start planning responses. For the rest of the evening, neither Emily nor Adrian approached their spouses. They stayed visible, social, and calm, exactly as they had arrived. To anyone watching from the outside, nothing unusual had changed. Emily spoke politely with familiar guests. Adrian greeted investors with his usual controlled confidence. Even Ryan and Vanessa moved through the party comfortably, unaware that the situation they believed they had carefully hidden was already understood by the only two people it actually mattered to. But something important had changed between Emily and Adrian. They were no longer strangers connected by coincidence. They were witnesses to the same truth. Near the end of the evening, as guests began collecting coats and saying their goodbyes, Adrian stepped beside Emily again, not urgently this time, but deliberately. "This didn't start tonight," he said quietly. "And it won't end tonight either." Emily understood exactly what he meant. "No," she agreed. "It won't." For a moment, they both watched Ryan across the room as he finished a conversation near the exit. He looked relaxed, confident, completely unaware that the version of the evening he believed had happened was already collapsing somewhere behind him. "I want to know how long," Adrian said finally. "Not just emotionally. Structurally." Emily turned toward him slightly. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean schedules. Travel overlaps. Financial movement. Access patterns," he replied calmly. "Affairs like this don't stay private without planning." Emily studied him for a second, not surprised by his words, but by how clearly he was already thinking ahead. "You think they coordinated more than meetings?" she asked. "Yes," Adrian said simply. Emily considered that carefully. Ryan had always been organized, predictable, intentional with his routines. If he had hidden something for months without her noticing clearly, it meant he had not been acting alone. It meant there had been structure supporting the secrecy. And structure always left traces. "What are you suggesting?" she asked quietly. Adrian didn't hesitate. "I'm suggesting we don't confront them yet," he said. "We confirm everything first." Emily looked back across the room again, this time not at Ryan himself, but at the distance between where they were standing. It suddenly felt much larger than it had earlier that evening. "If we do this," she said slowly, "we do it properly." Adrian nodded once. Exactly. There was no dramatic agreement between them. No emotional promise. Just a quiet understanding that the situation they were standing inside was no longer about suspicion. It was about truth. And truth, once confirmed completely, had a way of changing outcomes in ways neither Ryan nor Vanessa were prepared for yet. The investigation did not begin dramatically. It began quietly, through calendars, travel confirmations, and small details that had once seemed too ordinary to question. Over the next 2 weeks, Emily and Adrian stayed in contact, but carefully. They never met in obvious places, never spoke in ways that could be misunderstood if overheard, and never rushed conclusions without confirming them first. Neither of them wanted emotional guesses. They wanted facts, and the facts began appearing faster than either of them expected. It started with travel records. Adrian noticed that several business trips Vanessa had claimed were related to charity coordination overlapped perfectly with Ryan's regional partnership meetings. At first, it looked like coincidence. But when Emily checked Ryan's calendar entries from the same months, the pattern repeated again and again. Same cities, same weekends, same unexplained schedule gaps. They weren't just meeting at events, Emily said quietly during one of their late afternoon conversations in a quiet cafe far from their usual social circles. "No," Adrian agreed. They were planning time together. And structure always left traces. "What are you suggesting?" she asked quietly. Adrian didn't hesitate. "I'm suggesting we don't confront them yet," he said. "We confirm everything first." Emily looked back across the room again, this time not at Ryan himself, but at the distance between where they were standing. It suddenly felt much larger than it had earlier that evening. "If we do this," she said slowly, "we do it properly." Adrian nodded once. Exactly. There was no dramatic agreement between them. No emotional promise. Just a quiet understanding that the situation they were standing inside was no longer about suspicion. It was about truth. And truth, once confirmed completely, had a way of changing outcomes in ways neither Ryan nor Vanessa were prepared for yet. The investigation did not begin dramatically. It began quietly, through calendars, travel confirmations, and small details that had once seemed too ordinary to question. Over the next 2 weeks, Emily and Adrian stayed in contact, but carefully. They never met in obvious places, never spoke in ways that could be misunderstood if overheard, and never rushed conclusions without confirming them first. Neither of them wanted emotional guesses. They wanted facts. And the facts began appearing faster than either of them expected. It started with travel records. Adrian noticed that several business trips Vanessa had claimed were related to charity coordination overlapped perfectly with Ryan's regional partnership meetings. At first, it looked like coincidence. But when Emily checked Ryan's calendar entries from the same months, the pattern repeated again and again. Same cities.
Same weekends.
Same unexplained schedule gaps. They weren't just meeting at events, Emily said quietly during one of their late afternoon conversations in a quiet cafe far from their usual social circles. No, Adrian agreed. They were planning time together. They weren't planning to leave quietly, she said. No, Adrian replied calmly. They were planning to move upward. The affair suddenly looked different. It wasn't emotional escape. It was strategy. And strategy meant timing, which explained why neither Ryan nor Vanessa had acted openly yet. They weren't waiting for the right emotional moment. They were waiting for the right structural moment. Emily thought back to the party, the confidence Vanessa carried, the way Ryan avoided eye contact when he returned downstairs, the careful timing of everything they had done. They think we still don't know, she said. Yes, Adrian replied. Emily looked at the documents again, then closed them carefully. Then we shouldn't change that, she said. Adrian studied her expression for a moment. You want them to continue? He asked. Yes, she answered calmly. Why? Because if they think everything is still working, she said quietly, they'll finish showing us what they're planning. Adrian didn't respond immediately. Then he nodded once. For the first time since the party, both of them understood something clearly. They weren't reacting to betrayal anymore. They were preparing to expose a plan. By the time Emily and Adrian had confirmed the full pattern behind Ryan and Vanessa's actions, the situation no longer felt like a private betrayal between two couples. It had evolved into something structured, almost calculated in its progression. Every new piece of information they uncovered pointed toward timing, coordination, and a long-term objective that neither spouse had initially revealed. Adrian began adjusting his internal company oversight quietly. Without alerting anyone directly, he requested a review of all advisory recommendations tied to Vanessa's indirect involvement. At the same time, Emily focused on Ryan's financial behavior more closely than ever before, tracking the subtle movements that had once seemed insignificant but now formed a consistent pattern of preparation. What they discovered was not a single decisive moment, but a sequence of aligned actions. Vanessa's advisory role was slowly being positioned closer to decision-influencing spaces within Adrian's organization. Ryan's financial restructuring suggested preparation for liquidity shifts that would only make sense if he intended to reposition assets before a larger move. Nothing was officially wrong on paper, but everything was arranged in a way that suggested forward planning. It's not just an affair anymore, Adrian said one evening after reviewing the latest internal update. Emily nodded slowly. It's alignment, she replied. That word changed the tone between them, because alignment meant purpose, and purpose meant direction. They began planning carefully after that. Not emotionally, not impulsively, but strategically. Adrian scheduled a controlled executive review meeting for his internal team under the justification of standard investment reassessment. The timing was chosen deliberately. It coincided with a major industry event where both Ryan and Vanessa would already be publicly present. Emily, meanwhile, decided she would not confront Ryan privately before that moment. She understood now that private confrontation would only allow him to adjust his narrative. If Ryan was building something structured, then exposing it privately would give him space to reframe it. So instead, she agreed with Adrian on one thing. The truth would be revealed publicly. Not loudly, but completely. On a stage where neither Ryan nor Vanessa would be able to control the interpretation of what they had done. And for the first time since the night of the party, Emily felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not anger, not confusion, but direction. Because now, everything they had discovered was moving toward a single unavoidable point. The moment when hidden intention would finally have to stand in front of real consequences. The industry summit was exactly the kind of event where reputations were built and destroyed without anyone raising their voice. It was held in a large conference hall filled with executives, investors, media representatives, and high-level partners. Everything was structured to appear controlled, polished, and professional, where even conflict, if it appeared, was expected to be managed discreetly. Ryan arrived early that morning, confident and composed, unaware that the structure he believed he was operating within had already been quietly redefined. Vanessa was already present as part of Adrian's advisory attendance list, moving comfortably through conversations that now carried a different weight than before. To both of them, everything still looked normal, familiar, stable. But Emily and Adrian had already finalized their alignment. Adrian's internal review had concluded moments before the main session began. The findings were simple, direct, and impossible to ignore: coordinated financial movement, advisory positioning overlaps, and structured attempts at influence alignment between external and internal decision pathways. Nothing illegal on the surface, but clearly intentional in design. When Adrian stepped onto the stage later that afternoon, the room quieted naturally. He was not known for dramatic announcements. That is why what followed immediately felt different. He began with a standard corporate update: expansion progress, market positioning, future strategy. The audience followed calmly, expecting routine insights. Then he paused, a moment too long for it to feel accidental. "I want to address something that concerns structure, trust, and transparency," he said evenly. Emily, seated in the audience, remained still. Ryan straightened slightly in his seat. Vanessa's expression changed for the first time that day. Adrian continued, carefully choosing each word. "In any system, personal or professional, alignment without disclosure creates risk." The room shifted slightly. No one fully understood where the statement was going yet. Then Adrian motioned toward the screen behind him, and the first set of documented patterns appeared. Not accusations. Not emotional claims. Just timelines. Movements. Overlaps. Structured correlations. A silence spread across the room as understanding began forming collectively. Ryan's face tightened as he recognized pieces of the data. Vanessa turned slightly, her confidence slipping for the first time since the night of the party. And then Emily stood up. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. But completely. Every head in the room shifted toward her. She walked forward, not toward confrontation, but toward clarity. When she reached the front, she looked briefly at Ryan. There was no anger in her expression. Only certainty. "You said it started as meetings," she said calmly. "But you forgot meetings leave patterns." Ryan didn't respond immediately, because there was nothing left that could be said without confirming what was already visible to everyone in the room. Vanessa took a step back instinctively, realizing too late that visibility had replaced secrecy completely. Adrian closed the presentation quietly. "This concludes the review," he said. No further explanation was needed, because everything important had already been shown. Later that evening, after the room had emptied and the professional consequences began settling into place, Emily stood beside Adrian near the exit of the building. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Adrian said quietly, "You handled that better than most people would have." Emily looked ahead, not emotional, not shaken. "I didn't want revenge," she said. "I wanted truth." And in that final moment, nothing about what happened was chaotic anymore. It was resolved. Not through noise, but through exposure. And in that exposure, everything that had been hidden finally lost its control.